Good morning, I'm Nathalie Niddam, and I am here at the Biohacking Congress in Boston with 30 great speakers, as well as 30 amazing health exhibitors out in the exhibition hall. This weekend is life-changing. You get to meet the speakers, you get to meet researchers, scientists, biohackers, and you get to get your hands on and try so many of these amazing products and innovations that people have brought with them to share with all of the audience and each other. It is such a great and life-changing weekend. I think it's one of those things that everybody needs to experience. So you can go to biohackingcongress.com and get your tickets to one of the next two Biohacking Congress events. The next one is in Miami on October 22nd and 23rd of 2022. And following that will be Austin, Texas on February 4th and 5th, 2023. And now, let's talk to the man of the hour, Victor Sagalovsky, who is the CEO and co-founder of Litewater Scientific. Litewater Scientific is a company that makes water like you've never had before. We have a couple of bottles right here. And Victor has really dedicated his career to the research, the development, and now bringing this water to market. So welcome, Victor. It's such a pleasure to speak with you today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. It's been great being here. It's always a great experience to learn from others and fellowship with like-minded people and people in this space. Especially lately, it's good to have a FaceTime.
Oh yeah. Well, I've heard about you for so long, so it's always so amazing. There's nothing quite like meeting people in person. And I think if there's kind of a silver lining to the last couple of years, it's helping us all to realize how important connection is in person and being in the same room with people.
Yeah, so. Absolutely, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think Zoom's great, but it'll only get us so far.
It's great.
All right, so Victor, let's just dive in here because I'm a talker. I usually go really long. We only have so much time. So
sure.
Let's talk a little bit about, let's start with your story a little bit. Like, how did you come to this? What brought this whole thing, like this idea of deuterium depleted water into your sphere? How did you decide to really dedicate a lot of years, maybe your life, your career to it?
Absolutely. Well, for one, I recognized it for what it was, right? So when you recognize something for what it is, you put it, you prioritize it.
Yeah.
Right? Because you have a system. At least my values are like that. So if I find something that is really profound, I want to get as deep as I can into understanding it and being involved in it. So it was just synchronicity. I've always been interested in health, and I've always been passionate about not only my own health, but understanding how health works in general, how biochemistry of health, and how we can better ourselves, how we can improve, and how we can cheat age, really, too.
And that's what we're all after, right? Us biohackers, not only do we want to perform at our best right now, but we have a long view here, and we have big expectations for what's coming down the pipes at us.
Yeah, I've been like an armchair gerontologist. I kind of joke, since I was young, looking at old people and going, how am I I'm going to look like that one day,
Well, you seem to be doing a great job beating the clock. So
I'm working on it. Yeah.
All right. So tell us about Litewater. Tell us what it is, and how did you come across this specifically?
In 2004, I read an article entitled "In Search of the Fountain of Youth," and it was a NASA researcher that had written about he had gone to Eastern Europe, and he had done the research in what this was, and I thought this is just remarkable. This is completely remarkable, completely overlooked by mainstream science and medicine. But when I looked in deeper, it wasn't overlooked. It was looked at and then glossed over because there was just really nothing you could do. It's like, okay, we know deuterium. It was 1963. It was published in the United States. Deuterium is incompatible with life.
Okay, so
but they didn't do anything about it.
It's incompatible with life. It's all over the place, but there's nothing we can
do about it.
So what is deuterium? Like, I sat through your lecture yesterday, which was fascinating, but let's try and can we put it in a bite size?
Absolutely. We can simplify it.
Sure.
Deuterium is a version, or an isotope as it's called,
Yeah.
of hydrogen.
Okay.
And hydrogen is the first element, first element on the periodic table. You know, it was the first thing created in the universe. Still 70% of the universe is hydrogen. And hydrogen has these isotopes. In 1931, it was discovered that hydrogen is not all hydrogen.
Okay.
Now, hydrogen was believed to, or the hydrogen known as protium, which is 99.98% of all hydrogen, is very simple. It's the simplest element in nature because it has a proton and an electron.
Right.
And deuterium is a hydrogen with an added neutron.
Okay.
So it's double the mass.
Right. So
But
it's heavy.
It's heavier.
Right.
Yeah, it's a heavier hydrogen. In fact, it's in the periodic table, it's the only isotope of any element that is double the mass of the main constituent of that element.
Oh, no kidding.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So it doesn't really fit well in our biology. It's
Okay. You develop strong hands when you drink deuterium depleted water.
So, so when I looked at this, I said, "Wow, this is I'm thinking, who's doing work on this? You know, why is this kind of overlooked?" And I found a number of scientists working in a vacuum, let's say, wherever they were, trying to figure this thing out.
Amazing, amazing. And so you gave a really elegant explanation yesterday of why that extra proton is such a problem for our physiology. And it has to do, guys, with mitochondria, right? So we all know that mitochondria are the engines of our bodies, really. They produce the energy, the ATP that we run on.
There are factories. They're
factory, and they're fascinating, right? They're like, when you understand that a mitochondria has these little motors in it that spin at, 9,000 RPM?
At best, yeah.
At best, but, and when they're good, it's like, it's a bit mind-blowing that to think that in this body there's like thousands and millions of these little, like
35 trillion cells, and all of them highly specialized to do what they need to do to allow our consciousness to move forward. And
amazing, right? But I love the way you described how deuterium gums up the engine, and maybe you could explain that to the audience in a much more technical way than gumming up the engine.
Well, if you look at the mitochondria,
yeah,
these energy factories, and inside the mitochondria, everything is about moving energy forward. So in the form of protons and electrons. So in the electron transport chain, where the bulk of the ATP, which is the energy currency of our biology, is made, you have at the very end of that chain you have ATP synthase nanomotors. And like we said, these motors spin at 9,000 RPM at 100% efficiency, something that we couldn't make. We can't make an engine that can do that.
No, exactly. Right. Like humans cannot make an engine.
It's when scientists look at these nanomotors, they have a moment of awe, because it's because it really supports the intelligent design theory. Because there's no way that evolution alone could have created something that can do what it does.
So what is the intelligent design theory?
Well, that
there's a greater force?
There's a greater consciousness
that's
running the show.
Got it.
You know? So it's for those, that aha moment, you know, often leads to a spiritual awakening.
Interesting.
But in this case, it comes through science.
Right.
So it's just you can't argue with what you see. So these motors, they spin and they shuttle protons through. So in order for something to spin and have energy, you have to have a differential of protons here, and then more here. If there's more protons here and less protons here, these protons are going to want to go here.
Right.
So and the membrane in between.
Correct.
So this causes these motors to spin, and but these motors only have a place for a proton.
For one proton.
For one proton. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. And every roughly about 5 seconds, instead of getting a proton, it gets a proton and a neutron pair, which is called a deuteron.
Right.
And it doesn't fit.
Oh.
That's the problem.
Right.
It causes the motor to stutter and shake, and ultimately the wear and tear leads to the breakdown, not only the motor, but the integrity of the membrane is compromised. Because you have this motor, kind of shaking, trying to process something that doesn't fit in there, it's going to weaken that membrane, and that causes leakage. And once you have leakage, then
things start to go sideways.
That's it. Yeah, you run out of gas. So it's like trying to put diesel in your gas engine.
Right.
It's just not going to run.
So we've got trillions of these little motors. They're working really hard. Every 5 seconds, you're kind of going to, one of them is going to sustain some kind of damage. It's not total failure the first time, is it? Like
it's not
just
total
kind of
failure the
damages
first time. Yeah,
but
it
over
damages
time.
it. And in that moment, when it's being damaged, no ATP is produced as well.
Right. So it's a loss. So it's a lowering of the energy that's being produced at the same time.
A lower vibrational state. Yeah.
And this feeds into your own theory of aging. Which
Well,
I can
absolutely.
kind of see it, right? Like, I mean, as you're talking, I'm like, well, of course this would lead to aging at a very fundamental level.
Absolutely. This is like at the core, at the foundation. You try to figure out what causes us to age.
Right.
I mean, everything. Our cells are certainly a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. Like a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox. And as you did, if you ever did that, if you were ever at Kinko's in the '80s doing a copy of a copy of a copy, you would find that it loses
some integrity.
It loses its detail, right?
It's like when you're copying your house key from the 10th copy, it doesn't work anymore.
You lose details, and things get skewed. There's mistranslation in the replication process. So this is what's happening, and our entire lives. And if you could slow that down, you're not going to stop it, but if you could slow that down, then you can have a wider health span.
Right. And exactly. So what we're after, and it's interesting that we talk about energy going down, because of course, as we look at people as they age, they slow down. They start to lack the energy that they used to have when they were younger.
Because there's less mitochondria in the cell.
So there's fewer mitochondria, there's mitochondria getting damaged, and because of the damage, and this is just one of the assaults on the mitochondria, but it's very far upstream.
It's very far upstream.
So, okay, so then, but you talked yesterday about a blue zone that, I mean, I don't even know if it's defined as a blue zone, but you talked about a population of people in Siberia that have incredible longevity.
This is what started. This kicked off this whole thing. There was a young gerontologist and a biophysicist in Tomsk University in Siberia, and they were tasked by their professor with trying to figure out why these two populations of people, the Yakutians and the Altaians, why these people had so many more centenarians and why they were so much healthier than anywhere else in the Soviet republics, but also Europe in general.
Yeah.
And that was a hard problem, because for a couple of years they looked at everything. They looked at their diet, their lifestyle, their belief system, everything. And then they honed in on the water. So maybe it's the water.
Right.
So they tested the water for many different things. Now, this being the late 50s, deuterium had only been discovered in 31, so it was still fairly fresh. So they looked at that as well, and they saw that they had 16% less deuterium. And they go, aha, maybe this is it. So then they started doing experiments, agricultural experiments and animal experiments, plants and animals, to see if when you reduce deuterium or drink light water, if they're fed with light water, will it make a difference? And sure enough, it did. And then they looked at the literature, which was done already in the early 50s. What happens in the opposite case?
When you add deuterium.
When you have a water with more deuterium, and it's the opposite. It slows you down.
Huh.
So they had a little revelation. They published in '61. The Americans published shortly thereafter. Same thing, and then it just got kind of, I don't know, swept under the rug, or you move on to scientists. They're very analytical. They go, okay, we figured this one out, moving on.
Wow. So what was it about the water in Siberia? Because I mean, in Siberia, people are living a harsh life. Like, this is not an easy people
life.
Lounging by the
when
beach.
It's minus 60 degrees, 6-7 months out of the year, that's a harsh life.
It's a tough life,
tough
right?
life.
And they're not living. And at that time, certainly, they weren't living an industrialized life. So they were working the land, and they didn't have the comforts, let's say, that we have.
No.
They certainly didn't have their EMF block. Well, they didn't have EMF to deal with either. That's to be fair. So the deuterium. But where was the deuterium depleted water coming from? Sorry.
The glacial water.
Right. So there are natural sources.
In fact, what they did is first they drilled to these ice cores to see, because they're drinking glacial runoff.
Okay.
So they figured, okay, we're going to drill into the core and you get the same water that they're drinking which comes to them as glacial runoff, but we're going to get it before it melts.
Okay.
So they got that. So okay, that's 16%. Depleted in deuterium, what a revelation. This is the water they're drinking. This is probably it. But then they had another breakthrough because their funding ran out. They couldn't drill anymore through the core. So like, okay, well, let's just test the water that they're drinking year round, and let's test the surface water.
Okay.
And it was the same.
Oh, you're kidding.
It was the same.
Okay.
So that led them to a little better understanding as well, not only of the benefits of deuterium depleted water, but how deuterium depleted water is made in nature.
Okay, so how is
it's
it made?
reduced.
So what is it about glacial water that depletes the deuterium in the water?
It has to do with the hydrological cycle.
Okay.
So if you're away from, so the hydrological cycle is responsible for our rain and then evaporation, and then so it's like this cycle.
So it's that whole cycle of water.
It's the whole cycle, yeah.
Okay.
So when that cycle is amplified, like places where in very northern or southern latitudes where it's very cold, it gets concentrated more because when that water is evaporating, it turns to ice, or it gets colder faster. The phase change happens faster.
Okay, so it kind of crystallizes?
Crystallizes faster.
Yeah.
So over time, over the lifetime of that cycle, or the perpetuality of that cycle, you have less deuterium.
Okay.
But there's actually an easier explanation.
Okay.
Because the oceans are 155 ppm of deuterium.
Okay, so that's 155 parts per million, of deuterium.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
1 in 6,420 molecules.
Okay.
Okay. So is a water that's not H2O but HDO.
Okay.
Okay.
And 155 parts per million is relatively high. Like, what's our target?
For the body?
Yeah.
Well, we want to get to about in the 120 ppm.
Okay,
range.
so we
And
want 120.
Yeah,
okay.
we'll get into
and what are most people running at? Do you know?
150.
So most of us are running at 150 parts per.
Right. So what I was going to say was that if you're away from the ocean and you have a localized hydrological cycle,
Okay.
then and it's cold as well,
Okay.
then or you have extremes in temperature, which allows that hydrological cycle to work more efficiently in the phase change from liquid to from gas to liquid to solid to ice.
Right.
So it
And then back again.
And then back again over
Yeah.
and over and over and over again. More deuterium is taken out because water that is HDO versus H2O has a different melting point, different freezing point.
Yeah, makes sense.
Different.
It's going to behave completely differently.
Yeah, but not too differently, but different enough, like
Okay.
a half a degree of difference.
Okay.
So in that, the magic happens, and that's kind of what we do in the factory. As we do this, as we basically copy the hydrological cycle.
So you recreate that hydrological cycle in the factory to basically get rid of the deuterium, or as much of the deuterium as you can.
Yeah, we have that. We know we have that. We know we have that half a degree of difference. So like if you had pure D2O, which does not exist in nature.
Yeah.
It has a different freezing point. It's not 32. It's slightly higher.
Huh.
Okay. In this case, by a little more than a degree.
Okay.
But when you have HDO, which is the primary problem here, because D2O doesn't occur that often. Okay. So, but HDO does.
Okay.
And that D should be an H, but
Right,
instead
right.
it's a D.
It's a D.
Yeah. So in here, there's 3 drops. So if this
deuterium.
Yeah. If you consider what this is, half a liter is 10,000 drops total. Out of those 10,000 drops, 3 of them
Okay.
are going to be
So we're doing-
HDO.
we're doing well.
Well, no, I mean not in the. Actually, there'll be a lot less than 3 in this. I'm saying.
Oh,
if
you're
this was-
saying in a typical
in a
half
typical
liter.
yeah, in
I
a
see,
typical
I see.
half liter. Sorry, in a typical half liter bottle of water, that doesn't seem like very much.
No.
It's like 10,000 drops in a half liter, and only 3 drops are HDO.
But there's enough.
But that's enough because there's a cumulative effect.
So in this bottle of light water,
They're
there'd be-
97% less.
Wow, that's amazing.
So-
Okay, so let's talk about how do people use this? Like, I mean, I guess in a perfect world, we'd all live near a glacial spring.
Well, you would live somewhere where you're away from the hydrological cycle of the ocean.
Okay.
And then.
So I live in Toronto. I'm
Yeah.
far, far away from the ocean. I can't imagine that the water in Toronto is.
It's a little bit less, not much.
Okay.
Not much. So if the average is 150, I think I don't remember if I tested Toronto. I've tested some water in Canada, and it was upper 140s. So,
And even if you went, did you go into the Rockies at all? Like, did you go
so if you go
into the mountains?
Yeah,
like
so if you go,
Vancouver,
so
yeah.
if you go to the
Like Banff?
yeah, I didn't test those, but the eastern slope of the Rockies will always have less deuterium in the water than the western slope.
Interesting.
Because it's farther away from the
From the
hydrological
ocean?
from the
Yeah,
ocean.
yeah,
right?
okay. And
if you're
so
in
how
Boulder-
low does it get?
If you're in Boulder, Colorado, you get 139 ppm out of the tap.
So still, I mean, it's
But
better.
It's much better
Yeah,
because
yeah,
that
yeah.
little delta over time makes a big difference.
Interesting. And you get that from your tap water?
Yes, because your tap water is dependent. Your tap water is coming
It's
from local.
From local sources.
Yeah.
And so if you're living in one of these places and you can get to a spring, like a naturally fed spring, that would be even better if you can test the water and make sure it's clean and the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, and some springs are really good, some springs not so much. I think at that point it depends on the mineralization of the water. You know.
Okay.
You want less minerals, less total dissolved solids in your water, higher bicarbonates, and then certainly a mineral profile that has a nice taste.
Right.
And none of the heavy
Yeah.
heavy minerals.
Yeah, like the lake that we have a cottage and our lake has a lot of iron in it.
Yeah.
So the water is literally red.
Yeah, right.
So you
right.
don't want
So you have
to, we don't
filter
want to,
that.
we have to fill, we actually don't drink it. We get water from somewhere
It's hard to
else.
filter that out because you have to change your filter a lot.
It's well, yeah,
Yeah.
it gets gummed up,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So, okay, so now, so can people test what their deuterium levels are
Yeah,
in
you
their
could
bodies?
test. We set up a testing lab. You could test your saliva.
Yeah. And would you say, so for someone like me, for example, who's reasonably healthy, and is it age dependent? So do I accumulate deuterium as I age, or is it, like, does deuterium build up in the body? Because we know it's there, it gets introduced by the water, it's going to do some damage to the mitochondria, but does the deuterium stay, or does it,
Well, we know the
HDO
average.
stay, or does it get cleared?
It does not get cleared. It stays because when you look at the blood plasma, you see there's 5 to 10 times more deuterium in there than the main components of life.
Wow.
Glucose, all the minerals, magnesium, potassium, calcium, etc. It's just. Well, we're made of hydrogen, right?
Yeah.
So you're gonna.
So can we get rid of the buildup, or is it?
We can
or is
reduce
the idea?
it. We can
Okay.
reduce it.
So
And
how do
that's
we
the
do that?
That's the point. You do that by drinking deuterium depleted water.
Right.
If you don't have deuterium depleted water, then fasting helps.
Oh, interesting.
Absolutely, ketogenic diet helps because it's the whole point of fasting. As I see it, after doing so much fasting and coming to this revelation that we're fasting to lower our deuterium, because when you're fasting, you burn fat.
Yeah.
okay? And when you burn fat is already deuterium depleted. So when you burn slightly more than a kilo of fat, you get a liter of deuterium depleted water. Metabolic water.
So you make your own.
Metabolic water is deuterium depleted. All the water that our bodies are made from is deuterium depleted.
Cool. So
Because that's water that's made.
Yeah,
It's not water that we drink.
it hasn't been brought
It's
in.
synthesized. Yeah, it's brought in as hydrogen and oxygen,
right.
and then those two are combined, combusted, and we have metabolic water.
So for someone
That's
who's
the-
carrying a lot of adipose mass, does that mean that if they're able to figure out a way to release a lot of that fat, that actually will ultimately help to lower the deuterium levels in their body?
Potentially, it depends what the component of that adipose tissue is, what type of fat it is.
In
Because
what
if it
way?
was,
Like brown or white?
yeah,
Or, oh,
yeah,
really?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Because what if it was carbohydrates that caused that buildup? That's different. Because nature's strategy is to load the carbs and deplete the fats.
Right.
So carbs are high in deuterium, fats are low.
And what about
Lower.
protein?
Protein, it just depends on what the environment that it's grown in.
Okay, so it depends.
So if
if your cow was exposed to high deuterium water,
If your ruminant is in a place where the water again has to do with the hydrological cycle, where is your where is it?
yeah.
You know, Where is it? What kind of water is, what's the rainwater that's coming down there?
Okay.
You know, so if you have your ruminants in Colorado, it's going to be very different if you have them in
by the ocean,
in New Mexico or California. Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
But fat, by its very nature, is going to be depleted of deuterium.
Yes. Yes.
Interesting.
More so depleted.
So
yes.
this is why a higher fat. So in this instance, I mean, we're not going to make sweeping statements about diet because it's very individual in many, many ways, and there's so many different factors. But from a deuterium perspective, a higher fat, lower carb diet, eating protein, if you're eating animal protein from a place that's
yes.
not by the ocean.
Yes. And eating less, really.
And eating less,
Eating
right?
less.
So the fasting, I mean, fasting keeps coming up, right? It's the cheapest, it's the most available, it's the easiest biohack on the planet, and it keeps coming up.
What do animals do when they get sick? Do they eat?
No.
They just sit it out.
Even little kids stop eating when they get sick.
Right.
Like the instinct is no food.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're conserving your energy to move away from digestion toward healing.
Okay. So if you were fasting and drinking deuterium depleted water at the same time,
you would deplete faster.
If you were doing a water fast.
Yeah, you would deplete faster.
Interesting. So then how long would it take me, let's say, so we don't know what my deuterium levels are, we haven't tested
We could guess.
Okay.
It's going to be the same as where you live, most likely.
So I live in Toronto, so around...
So about close to 150.
Okay, somewhere around 150. So for me to lower my deuterium levels, I mean, I might not get to 116 was the optimal?
The optimal is somewhere in the 120 range.
Okay, and 120.
And
so
that first delta, that first 30 ppm, that's where the bulk of the benefit comes.
Okay.
And then incrementally from there on, as you go lower, then it improves. But the fundamental benefit is in that first 30 ppm. Why? That's the big question. Why?
Yeah.
Why hasn't biology adapted over all this billion plus years of mitochondrial function to limit the deuterium? And yes, it had. The answer is yes, it has. But when I believe, and there's evidence to support this, that when Homo sapiens evolved, we had less deuterium on the planet
to begin with.
Yeah, so we had 120 something like that, and in certain places you still find that, you know, in the mountainous areas, you know, like in the Himalayas, it's in the like 125 ppm range, certain springs.
Okay.
So there are people that are living in these areas, and you could clearly see that they just have more gusto.
Yeah.
So that's. But for you would, or for anybody really, you can if you drink deuterium depleted water, you will release 0.5 to 1 ppm per day. So you'll lower your deuterium levels.
So in a perfect world, I would drink deuterium depleted water all the time. But you know, deuterium depleted water is an investment. Like you have to work really hard to make it. Like this is not, you know, we're not just going and scooping water out of a place. Like you have a factory,
because
there's technology
it's not a standard
involved.
Filtration process. We're separating water from water.
Which is somewhat of a mind-bending
you know,
concept.
if we could take those 3 drops and just will them away, it's like rise to the top and skim you off.
Yeah.
There it goes.
If only they would float.
But they're in there randomly, you know.
Yeah.
So you have to separate them intelligently.
So in order for me to meaningfully reduce my deuterium, how long would I have to drink deuterium depleted water for, do you think? Like could I like, is it the kind of thing that people can kind of pulse, do like a 3-month protocol and then ride it out? And like if you're reasonably healthy, I'm imagining that in certain disease states you're going to commit more heavily to it.
Yeah. So there's a few protocols you can follow. One is to drink it continuously.
Yeah.
And in the first 45 to 90 days, you'll get to that spot somewhere in the 120 ppm range or lower. And you could just continue to do that and maintain. Now, when original research was done in Russia, they weren't not testing their deuterium level in the body.
Right.
You know, it's a very sophisticated instrument. It's not something that they wanted to devote resources to. So they were just testing other things like blood markers.
Right.
So at that time, they found that even 1 week a month had incredibly positive benefit.
Really?
Yeah.
And so what blood markers would improve?
Everything.
You're kidding.
Everything.
So blood
Everything
sugar.
just everything just starts being optimized. Your body just runs better. It has more energy to deal with the things that were sitting on the shelf.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't have time for this, or I don't have
we'll
energy
put it
for
away.
this.
I don't have the energy.
We'll put it away.
So I would think that then if you, let's say you devoted a 3 to 5 day fast, and for that whole week, you also drank deuterium depleted water,
You would
would
simply
that
just-
amplify the
you would-
benefits?
You would deplete faster.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
You would deplete
Yeah.
faster. But once you start drinking regular water again,
You're
your
reloading.
levels are gonna start creeping up. Yeah, it's just like we're carrying this deuterium burden, and that little burden gets heavier as we move through time. It's kind of like looking at the hour hand of a clock. You don't
Yeah.
really see it, but when you turn your head and turn it back, it
Yeah, you
moves.
don't see it move.
You
Yeah,
don't see it
I
move,
got
but
you.
it's moving. It's moving slowly. So we can move in the other direction.
Okay.
That's why I'm so
Interesting.
excited about this, because
Yeah.
I haven't found anything else that is a net energy benefit over time. Everything is a temporary energy benefit, the calories you eat, the energy you make. But as far as an intervention, a lifestyle intervention that is a net energy benefit, like truly
Yeah.
over time, there's nothing else. There's just really nothing else.
That's incredible. And so, okay, so the one protocol was drink it once a month for a week.
That
which
was one.
That's one
That's
protocol,
one.
which at least allows you to kind of periodically reduce the load.
Yeah.
Right?
If people are, the doctors that specialize in this, and there's a field now in a study called deuteronomics.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah,
Okay.
which is the biochemistry of deuterium.
Okay.
Basically, it endeavors to explain how deuterium is managed by the body. And the scientists involved in this are really just on another level. They're
And drinking
really,
their deuterium depleted water every day.
yeah, they're now publishing papers and such. The latest paper by Dr. Laszlo Boros, who coined the term deuteronomics, is fascinating because he's talking about the food that you feed your ruminants, your cattle.
Yeah.
And how feeding them excessive grain
Again,
increases their deuterium level, which increases the deuterium level of everybody, up higher in the food chain.
Of the food.
Humans, essentially.
Yeah.
And how this is a potential problem of chronic illness that we're facing.
That's crazy. And so let's go back to the ruminants. So if they're eating the diet they're supposed to eat, and they don't live by the ocean, so they're eating grass, let's say, so they're just grazing.
Yeah.
So this results in lower deuterium levels, or does it not?
Yes.
Ish.
Well, you want to. It results in levels that are sustainable.
Okay. Yeah. No, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be in the 120s.
Yeah.
It's just.
And
not
I don't
gonna
want
be
to knock
sky high.
anything close to the ocean either.
No, there's other benefits. We're
Yeah.
just talking about deuterium
Yeah.
here. Like
Yeah.
there's benefits. There's minerals. There's whatever. There's energy. There's.
You can't
a lot
take me
of-
away from the ocean.
No, exactly. We love the ocean. So, I mean, the ocean itself has incredible healing benefits. But we're just talking about deuterium now. So, what about? You talked about carbohydrates earlier. Is there a difference in different types of vegetables in terms of deuterium
Absolutely.
contribution?
You just look at nature, and nature will. It's like gravity, right? The heavy's at the bottom, the light's at the top. So your root vegetables are going to have more deuterium than something, than something in it's a flowering. Something at the higher up in the.
Interesting. What about fruit?
Fruit is dependent. It depends, because fruit is full of sugar,
Yeah.
right? Glucose, a lot of hydrogen.
Fructose, all the
So-
things. Yeah.
So you have
It's more concentrated.
It has it's let's just say it's normal. It's not
Okay.
it's not depleted at all.
Okay, so in the
Fat-
vegetable kingdom, in the plant kingdom, if we were going to eat plants, then the best ones would be those above ground leafy fibrous vegetables,
the
right?
dark leafy greens.
Even berries might be okay because they're itty bitty.
Berries, yeah.
Not a lot of
Yeah,
sugar.
but everything's going to have deuterium in it.
No, that's a given. Like there's nothing that has no deuterium in it. It's just present. So now what we're looking to do is reduce where we can.
Yeah, I
and
wouldn't
not
go. I wouldn't go
augment.
overboard with by concentrating on the food aspect of it. What I would just say is that, or what I do say, is that eat less.
Overall.
Eat less overall, and eat less carbs.
Yeah.
You know,
So it goes back to the caloric restriction, right? Which
Caloric
is
restriction.
caloric restriction is a tool in anybody's longevity kit.
Yeah.
So whether you do that by fasting a day a week or 2 days a week and eating normally the rest of the time, or you fast for 5 days once a month or 3 days, whatever the case may be, or you just eat less every day, you're ultimately creating that deficit.
Yeah. Eat as much as you need, but usually people have trained themselves to eat a lot more than they need.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So this burdens your system, not only your digestive system, but everything. I always ask people, when was the last time you fasted? And people can't remember.
No, or when's the last time you felt hungry?
When's the last time you felt hungry?
You allowed yourself to feel. I mean, everybody feels hungry,
Right.
but how long? It's funny. Like people, I used to know someone who they were like, "You can't be around me if I'm hungry, because I will take your head off," and this person would become frantic the minute they had a hunger pang. They would never allow themselves to experience hunger. And I think it's one of the lessons that fasting teaches us.
Absolutely.
Is you can
This is the
feel
problem.
hungry and learn to turn off the fear, because it goes to the limbic brain, right?
Right.
There's a fear reflex that says, you're starving, you got to eat. And if we can engage our prefrontal
And it's
cortex
just
to
not
say
true.
it's okay.
We're overeating, overthinking, overbreathing. We're drinking a lot of water and still dehydrated. And a lot of this has to do with because we learned it from somebody. So we perpetuate this
The great myth.
this unconsciousness. You know,
Yeah.
it's a perpetuation of it because somebody else did it. You know, it's like when you put a bunch of monkeys in a room, if you know that experiment, and they just really quick, they put a bunch of monkeys in the room, and then they put a bunch of bananas on the second floor, and then whenever a monkey would climb to get the bananas, they would spray him with a hose, okay? And that pretty much meant that, and when a monkey tried to go up to get the bananas, they actually sprayed all the monkeys with a hose.
Oh my God.
So yeah.
That's terrible.
So-
So now the monkeys would stop each
So
other
that-
from going up.
They would stop each other from going up.
Yeah.
And by the third generation of monkey, they stopped, or not third generation, but they kept revolving monkeys in and out of the room.
Yeah.
So third generation of the experiment.
Yeah.
So by that time, they stopped spraying them with the hose, and the monkeys in the room that were new were getting pulled down, and they were just perpetuating the same thing. So they kept pulling the monkeys back from getting the bananas, even though they didn't know why they were doing it.
How did the new monkeys know?
Because they were conditioned from the previous ones. The previous ones.
Oh, so they left the previous ones in the room with the new monkeys.
With the new ones
They
until
added new
they
monkeys.
swapped out all the old monkeys.
Oh.
And now new monkeys are trying to go up to get the bananas. The old ones are pulling them back, even though they were never conditioned with the fire hose in the first place.
Wow.
So this is called the perpetuation of stupidity, and this is what's happening on our
Well,
planet.
they were being sprayed with water. I mean, in defense of the monkeys.
So
But yeah.
we look at the U.S. RDA of something, and we go, well, that's what the USDA said. We have to get 25 milligrams of iron. So okay, did you get it? So we have bad.
It's bad information.
Bad information.
That keeps getting passed on.
Information. And this is why I became passionate for this, because I identified where there's bad information.
Yeah.
So I'm very logical. I'm very analytical. I'm very critical in thought. And I noticed that I said, hey, this is bad information. Okay. Hey, everybody, this is bad information.
Yeah.
And we say, oh well, it's not my problem, because I've already indoctrinated myself in the system. So I haven't indoctrinated myself in the system.
Well, and it's a little bit, people are like, well, why are you the only one talking about this? Clearly you're crazy. Like,
Right.
my doctor would tell me, or we would know this. This would be better known.
Of course.
And in our world of biohacking, this is one of many things that people are trying to communicate out, that, what, guys, whether by ignorance or for whatever reason, which we won't get into right now, it's not being disseminated, it's not being shared, and there is a better way.
Yeah.
And that's what this is about.
There's a better way. I started when I had great respect for doctors until I asked them how much nutrition class they had.
In 4 hours. Yeah.
Then I said, okay, you're a mechanic,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
want something that is of a deeper understanding, a more holistic understanding. And then you find those teachers, and they are on the fringe, or they certainly were, and now I see a lot of doctors coming to these conferences for continuing education.
Yeah.
Because maybe
Yes.
some of them actually did go into the field to become healers.
Yeah.
And their information was incomplete, and they recognized that. So now they're seeking out proper information.
I always talk about it as the doctors who remain curious, the doctors who are able to keep their curiosity alive through the process of becoming a doctor end up being the ones that we meet at these conferences, who are there always seeking new information, and they make amazing revelations. So,
Exactly.
all right, so we're gonna have to wind it up, and I think we have to have a part 2 to this,
We
because
should,
there is
yeah.
so much more information.
We barely scratched
the surface.
Just warming up.
I know, we're just getting going here. So the foundation, like the bare minimum protocol would be, the fasting, drinking the deuterium depleted water for a week, a month. I'm sure that you have lots of other protocols, especially for people dealing with health issues, because those people are going to need more help. So where can people get more information? Where can they find you? How do we point people to get more resources other than part 2 of this podcast?
Of course. So they can go to our website, which
Yeah.
is drinklitewater.com. Litewater is spelled Lite.
Lightwater. Yes.
And they can, there's a lot of information there.
Yeah. It's a great website, actually.
I've done a bunch of podcasts. If you're more of a, if you want more like in-depth information, like if you're a doctor or you're a researcher, then you can go to deuteriumdepletion.org.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, I put up like, I don't know, there's everything I could find on it.
Amazing.
In the last 60 years is on that website. Studies, trials, et cetera, et cetera. And where else can you go? There's deuteriumtest.com.
Oh, so that's where you can get your deuterium tested.
Yes, and we do a summit. We did one last year. This is going to be our second year. It's called deuteriumdepletionsummit.com.
Mm-hmm.
It's the best or the top doctors, researchers, and influencers, thinkers in this deuteronomics space are gonna basically. Last year we had 10 of these bright minds sharing what they know. It was very very technical
so it's a high-level conference.
It's a high-level summit, but I mean it's available for anybody because I think if you're curious, you will
educate yourself.
You will educate yourself.
Sure.
You'll learn the vocabulary. You'll understand a little bit better. Or if you just want some basic superficial knowledge, that's also available. So you can get, if you go to drinklitewater.com, we have a very easy to follow, simple to read guidebook on
Amazing.
this. It's like a 35-page guidebook that illustrate with. I think we need to put more illustrations in there. People like enough pictures.
More pictures.
People want more pictures.
Maybe you need to make like a coloring book so people can color it in.
There's somebody actually doing that. I met a doctor that was really passionate about deuterium, and he started making a comic book with characters and whatnot.
I love it. That's so creative.
Yeah. So I just want to finish off by saying that we want the path of least resistance. We don't want to work too hard, but we want to work hard enough.
Yeah.
And this is that perfect balance. Is like there's not much you need to do. It's a little pricey to have to pay for your water versus just getting it from your filter or your tap, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
It's so worth it because once you lower your deuterium level by 20% and you keep it there, things change.
You feel different.
You feel different. You feel younger. You feel lighter. You feel younger. Your brain works better. You
More
sleep
energy.
better. You have more. You have more energy. It's functional energy. It's not wiry energy.
Yeah. Not that.
It's functional. You feel younger. It's just it's a profound experience, and I just want to share that with everybody. That if you have the means to try it, do it. It's worth it.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Victor. This has been fascinating. I mean, your talk yesterday was fascinating, but this has been amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.